The conference hall on Zenith Prime had never been this quiet before. Ambassador Kelran of the Vexari stood at his designated platform and looked around the massive circular chamber where representatives from 47 species usually gathered every 3 months to discuss galactic affairs. The Thorians were present in their gleaming armor. The Quillan merchants buzzed quietly in their corner. The Mindari sat in their meditation pose with their large eyes half closed. Everyone was here except the humans. Kelran checked his datapad again. No messages from Earth, no communications from any human colony, no emergency signals or diplomatic notes explaining their absence. For 300 years since humanity had joined the galactic community, they had never missed a single council meeting. The humans were always early, always prepared, always ready to help solve whatever crisis had emerged since the last gathering. The council session began without them. High Chancellor Vrix, a Thorian with silver scales and ancient eyes, called the meeting to order. The first issue was a border dispute between the Thorian Empire and the Axel Dominion over a small system containing valuable mining asteroids. Normally, Captain Jake Morrison or Commander Lisa Hayes would step forward with a mediation proposal that both sides could accept. The humans had a gift for finding compromises that satisfied everyone, but today there was only silence. The Thorian representative, a general named Vorn, stood and declared that his empire would take the system by force if necessary. The Axel ambassador hissed a threat in response. Voices rose. Tempers flared. Chancellor Vrix tried to restore order, but the argument continued for an hour before both sides agreed to table the discussion. Kelran noticed how easily things had escalated without human intervention. The second issue was a plague outbreak on several mining colonies in the Outer Rim. 3 million beings were infected and the death toll was rising. Normally, human medical ships would already be en route with supplies and doctors. The humans had the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy, and they shared it freely. But today there was no offer of help because there were no humans to make the offer. The Quillan Collective offered to send medical supplies, but only at triple the usual cost. Several smaller species protested that they could not afford such prices. The Mindari offered to send healers, but their telepathic methods only worked on species with compatible brain structures. The discussion ended with no real solution. Kelran felt a growing unease in his chest. After the council session ended, Kelran walked through the station's main corridor. Through the tall windows he could see hundreds of ships docked at the station, vessels from every corner of known space. But he noticed something that made him stop. There were no human ships. Usually at least a dozen human vessels were docked here at any given time. Medical ships, cargo haulers bringing aid supplies, patrol ships protecting the trade routes, research vessels sharing scientific data. Now there was nothing. Kelran went to his quarters and began searching through communication records. He found the last message from humanity sent 3 weeks ago. It was a routine report from Commander Lisa Hayes about a successful humanitarian mission to help refugees from a natural disaster. Nothing in the message suggested anything was wrong. Then the communications just stopped. He contacted several Vexari who worked with humans regularly. A trade coordinator named Pella said human cargo ships had stopped arriving at scheduled times. An engineer named Ka said human technicians had stopped responding to maintenance requests for the transit network beacons. A medical officer named Senna said the human hospital ship that visited her station every month had not appeared. Over the next few days, the situation became worse. The border dispute between the Thorians and Axel turned violent. Warships exchanged fire. Colonies were threatened. Without human peacekeepers to patrol the neutral zones, nothing prevented the conflict from escalating. The plague spread to 6 more worlds. Without human medical aid, local hospitals were overwhelmed. Pirate attacks increased on trade routes that human patrol ships once protected. Merchant vessels were being captured or destroyed. Kelran brought his concerns to the Galactic Council. He proposed sending a mission to human space to investigate what had happened. Chancellor Vrix was reluctant. The Thorians considered it beneath their dignity to chase after humans who had chosen not to attend council meetings. The Quillan saw no profit in spending resources on an investigation. But the smaller species agreed with Kelran. Something was clearly wrong. A small fleet was authorized. Kelran would lead the mission aboard a Vexari scout ship. Pix, a Quillan trader who had worked extensively with humans, volunteered to join. Lieutenant Kryn, a young Thorian officer who respected human methods, also came aboard. They set course for the Sol system, humanity's home. The journey took 5 days. During that time, Kelrin researched everything he could find about humanity. They had achieved faster-than-light travel in the year 2187 by human calendar, and encountered the galactic community shortly after. At first, other species had been wary of these newcomers. Humans were not the strongest species or the smartest or the most technologically advanced, but they had something unique. They cared about other species in a way that puzzled everyone else. When the Quillen homeworld faced an environmental disaster, humans sent aid with no expectation of payment. When the Mindari were attacked by pirates, human ships defended them despite having no alliance or treaty. When smaller species needed help building infrastructure, human engineers volunteered their time. Slowly, humanity became the galaxy's helpers, mediators, peacekeepers, and problem solvers. Captain Jake Morrison had personally negotiated peace in 7 major conflicts. Commander Lisa Hayes had led humanitarian missions to 30 different species. Scientist Greg Palmer had shared medical breakthroughs that saved billions of lives. Engineer Kate Morrison had designed most of the galactic transit network. The galaxy had come to depend on humanity. Kelrin realized that now more than ever. When they arrived at the Sol system, Kelrin felt his breath catch. The system was intact. Planets orbited the sun normally. Space stations were in their correct positions. Ships were docked at orbital facilities. Everything looked normal except for one crucial detail. There were no life signs, no communications, no activity. They approached Earth. The blue and green planet looked beautiful and peaceful. Cities were visible from orbit, their lights still functioning on the night side. But when they descended to scan for inhabitants, they found nothing. The cities were empty. Buildings stood undamaged. Vehicles remained parked on streets, but there were no humans anywhere. Kelrin, Pix, and Kryn landed in a city called New York. They walked through empty streets lined with tall buildings. The power was still running. Automated systems maintained the infrastructure. But no people walked these sidewalks. No voices echoed between the buildings. They found homes with belongings still inside, offices with work left on desks, markets with goods on shelves. Everything suggested people had simply walked away. In the center of the city, they found a massive display screen still functioning. As they approached, it activated. Commander Lisa Hayes appeared on screen. Her face was calm but sad. She looked directly at the camera and spoke a message that had been set to play for anyone who came looking. The message was simple and devastating. We are done. Solve your own problems. Humanity has left the stage. The screen went dark. Kelrin stood in the empty street and felt the weight of those words. Humanity had not been destroyed or died out. They had chosen to leave. They had walked away from 300 years of thankless service, and the galaxy was already falling apart without them. 3 months had passed since Kelrin returned from Earth with the devastating news that humanity had abandoned the galaxy. The emergency council session he called drew representatives from every major species. The evidence was undeniable. Humans were gone and they were not coming back. The message from Commander Lisa Hayes played on screens throughout the chamber. We are done. Solve your own problems. Humanity has left the stage. Some council members reacted with anger, others with disbelief. A few like Kelrin felt something closer to shame. Chancellor Vrix declared that the council would simply fill the roles humans had performed. Vexari diplomats would handle mediations. Quillen medical teams would respond to health crises. Thorian military forces would patrol trade routes and maintain order. It sounded reasonable in the council chamber. In practice, it fell apart immediately. The war between the Thorian Empire and the Axel Dominion had grown from a border skirmish into full-scale conflict. 6 star systems were now contested territory. Millions of soldiers fought on dozens of worlds. The Vexari diplomats tried to mediate, but they lacked the patience humans had shown. When negotiations stalled, the Vexari simply reported failure and moved on. Humans would have stayed at the table for weeks or months until they found a solution. The war continued. Lieutenant Kryn watched her homeworld prepare for total war from her post on a Thorian battleship. She had seen Captain Jake Morrison work once during a training exercise. He had spent hours learning about both sides of a conflict, understanding their cultures and needs and fears. He found solutions that let both sides claim victory. Kryn tried to suggest this approach to her commanders, but they dismissed it as weakness. Thorian honor demanded strength, not compromise. She watched as more ships left for the front lines and wondered how many would return. The plague that had started on mining colonies 3 months ago had spread across 17 worlds. The Quillen Collective sent medical supplies as promised, but only to worlds that could pay their prices. Entire populations died because they lacked the currency to buy treatment. The Quillen saw nothing wrong with this. They were merchants, not charity workers. Humans had provided medical aid freely to anyone who needed it, regardless of ability to pay. Senna, the Mindari healer, worked desperately at a hospital on one of the infected worlds. She had studied human medical protocols and tried to apply them, but the knowledge was incomplete. Humans had not just brought medicine. They brought enough personnel and equipment to actually stop plagues from spreading. Senna watched patients die that she knew human doctors could have saved. Pirate activity exploded across the galaxy. What had been scattered raids by small groups became organized campaigns by unified pirate clans. They targeted cargo ships, passenger vessels, and even attacked orbital stations. The Thorian military was deployed to fight them, but Thorian tactics were designed for honorable combat between warriors. Pirates did not fight honorably. They ambushed, retreated, and struck where defenses were weakest. Human patrol ships had used completely different strategies. They gathered intelligence, predicted pirate movements, and prevented attacks before they happened. They also offered captured pirates rehabilitation instead of execution, which reduced the cycle of violence. The Thorians knew only how to destroy enemies, not reform them. Pix the Quillen trader lost his entire merchant fleet in a single week. Pirates ambushed his ships one by one as they traveled routes that had been safe for decades. Human patrol vessels had made these routes secure. Now there was no protection. Pix tried to hire Thorian military escorts, but they were too expensive and too busy with the war. He tried to organize other merchants into convoys for mutual protection, but Quillen culture was too individualistic. Everyone competed rather than cooperated. Pix remembered how humans had organized the Merchant Protection Alliance that kept trade flowing safely. Without human leadership, the alliance had dissolved within a month. The worst crisis emerged from something most beings never thought about. The Galactic Transit Network was failing. This network of faster-than-light highways connected thousands of star systems. Quantum anchors at specific points in space created stable tunnels that ships could use to travel vast distances quickly. Humans had built most of this network and maintained all of it. Engineer Kate Morrison and her teams had serviced the anchors on a regular schedule, replacing worn components and recalibrating the quantum fields. Without this maintenance, the anchors began breaking down. The first major failure happened in the Coreward sector. A quantum anchor collapsed while 17 ships were in transit. The ships were scattered across hundreds of light years. Some were destroyed. Others were stranded in deep space. Rescue efforts saved a few crews, but most were lost. The Council tried to organize maintenance teams, but none of the other species had the expertise. Human engineers had made it look easy because they were exceptionally skilled. The truth was that maintaining the transit network required knowledge that humanity had spent a century developing. More anchors failed over the following weeks. Entire regions of the galaxy became isolated as the safe routes between them disappeared. Trillions of beings found themselves trapped on their homeworlds, unable to travel. Trade stopped. Communication slowed. The galaxy that had been unified for centuries began fragmenting into isolated pockets. Kelron spent his days searching for any clue about where humanity had gone. He studied the abandoned human facilities across known space. On a research station near the Outer Rim, he found logs from scientist Greg Palmer. The entries detailed humanity's growing frustration over the years. They helped and helped and helped, but the galaxy never seemed to learn. Every conflict they resolved would repeat with different players. Every technology they shared would be weaponized. Every act of kindness was treated as obligation rather than gift. The final entries mentioned something called the Threshold, a region of space beyond the Outer Rim that humans had been exploring. Engineer Kate Morrison's logs were even more revealing. She described the exhaustion of maintaining the transit network, while other species complained about minor delays. She wrote about training programs where she tried to teach other species how to do the maintenance themselves, but no one wanted to learn. Why bother learning when humans would do it for free? Her last entry simply said that humanity had given the galaxy every tool and technique they needed. Whether they used those tools was no longer humanity's problem. Kelron shared his findings with the Council. He proposed that they needed to not just use human technology but understand human philosophy. Humanity had not just been service providers. They had been trying to teach the galaxy how to cooperate, how to be selfless, how to build something better together. The council members listened politely, but most dismissed his ideas. The Thorians wanted military solutions. The Quillen wanted profitable solutions. The Mindari wanted spiritual solutions. No one wanted to fundamentally change how they thought. The fragmentation continued. Species that had cooperated for generations returned to old hostilities. The careful balance that humanity had helped maintain was gone. Chancellor Vrix called another emergency session to discuss the crisis. He stood before the council and admitted something that shocked everyone. The galaxy needed humanity not for their technology or their ships or their medicine. It needed them because they had been the moral center that held everything together. Without that center, civilization was collapsing. Kelrin looked around the chamber and saw fear in eyes that belonged to dozens of different species. They had all taken humanity for granted. They had assumed humans would always be there to solve problems and keep the peace. Now they understood the terrible truth. Humanity had not been serving the galaxy out of weakness or obligation. They had been holding together something precious that everyone else had been too blind to appreciate. And now that humanity was gone, they were watching that precious thing crumble into dust. The council session ended with no solutions. Everyone returned to their homeworlds to face whatever crisis waited there. Kelrin remained behind, staring at the empty chair where human representatives used to sit. Somewhere out there, humanity was building a new life without the burden of carrying the galaxy on their shoulders, and the galaxy was learning a harsh lesson about what happens when you take your heroes for granted. 6 months after humanity went silent, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The Thorian Axle War had consumed 12 star systems and pulled in 6 other species who chose sides based on old alliances and grievances. The plague known as the Silent Death had killed 8 billion beings across 23 worlds. The Galactic Council had fractured into 3 competing factions that could barely communicate with each other. The transit network was 40% non-functional. Pirates controlled entire sectors. Refugees fled dying worlds with nowhere safe to go. Everything humanity had built was crumbling. New movements rose from the chaos. General Vorn, the Thorian who had once dismissed human methods as weakness, now led something called the Purity Front. His message was simple and appealing to those looking for someone to blame. Humanity had made the galaxy soft and dependent. Species had forgotten their strength while relying on human charity. The solution was to reject everything human and return to the old ways where the strong dominated and the weak adapted or died. Vorn's followers attacked any species that tried to use human methods or technology. They destroyed hospitals using human medical equipment. They sabotaged repair efforts on the transit network. They preached that the galaxy's pain was necessary to burn away the weakness humanity had created. Other species tried different approaches. The Unity Collective formed from dozens of smaller species who banded together for survival. They attempted to recreate human systems of cooperation and aid, but they lacked resources and expertise. Their medical ships carried outdated equipment. Their peacekeeping forces were too small to patrol even a fraction of the space humans had covered. Their diplomatic corps meant well but could not match human skill at finding compromises. They were trying to be what humanity had been but falling short at every turn. The strangest movement was the Silent Seekers. This cult believed humanity had not simply left but had ascended to a higher plane of existence. They built temples on abandoned human worlds and prayed to images of Captain Jake Morrison and Commander Lisa Hayes. They believed humanity would return when the galaxy proved worthy. Their devotion was sincere but ultimately useless. The galaxy needed practical help, not religious faith. Kelrin had left the council completely. He could not stomach the endless arguments that accomplished nothing while beings died. He assembled a small crew for a personal mission to find humanity. Pix joined him despite having lost everything in the pirate raids. The Quillen trader had been changed by his losses. He no longer cared about profit. He wanted to understand why humans had succeeded where everyone else failed. Senna the Mindari healer came aboard carrying grief from watching thousands die from the plague. She hoped humanity might share the cure they surely possessed. The final crew member was someone unexpected. Lieutenant Holly Chen was half human and half Vexari. Her mother Megan Chen had been a human scientist who fell in love with a Vexari diplomat. Holly had been born 30 years ago when humanity still engaged with the galaxy. She grew up between 2 cultures and understood both. When humanity left, her human mother had gone with them. Holly stayed behind, torn between two halves of her identity. She joined Kelrin's mission, hoping to understand why her mother had chosen to leave. Holly's insights proved invaluable immediately. She explained that humans saw problems differently than other species. Most species asked who was at fault. Humans asked what would help. Most species competed for advantage. Humans looked for mutual benefit. Most species thought in terms of their own survival. Humans thought in terms of everyone's survival. It was not that humans were better or more noble. They simply had a different way of seeing the universe that came from their unique history. Kelrin's crew spent weeks following clues across the outer rim. They found abandoned human outposts and research stations. Each location provided pieces of the puzzle. On a station orbiting a dead star, they found logs from scientist Greg Palmer describing something called the Threshold. It was a region of dangerous space filled with gravitational anomalies and subspace distortions. Most species avoided it, but humans had spent years mapping safe paths through it. Palmer's final log entry mentioned that the threshold led somewhere extraordinary. Following Palmer's coordinates, they reached the threshold. The space around them twisted in ways that made their sensors malfunction. Holly remembered stories her mother told about the beauty of chaos. Humans had been drawn to the threshold not despite its dangers, but because of them. They saw challenge where others saw only threat. Using coordinates from the logs, they navigated through the deadly region. It took 3 days of careful flying. One wrong move would have torn their ship apart. But Holly's understanding of human thinking helped them choose the right paths. On the far side of the threshold, they found an abandoned human outpost clinging to an asteroid. The facility was powered down but intact. When they docked and entered, automatic systems activated. Lights came on. Atmosphere generators hummed to life. A computer core initiated, and they discovered what humans called the archive. The archive was massive beyond comprehension. It contained every piece of knowledge humanity had used to help the galaxy. Medical databases with cures for 10,000 diseases. Engineering specifications for ships, stations, and transit network anchors. Agricultural techniques for growing food on barren worlds. Diplomatic protocols for mediating between different species. Educational curricula for teaching cooperation and problem solving. Everything was organized and documented in hundreds of languages. Humans had left behind the complete instruction manual for galactic civilization. Kelrin spent hours exploring the files. He found maintenance schedules for the transit network with detailed repair procedures. He found plague response protocols that could stop the silent death. He found conflict resolution frameworks that could end the Thorian Axle War. Every crisis the galaxy faced had a solution here. Humanity had not abandoned them to suffering. They had given them every tool needed to save themselves. Holly found personal logs from her mother. Dr. Megan Chen had been part of the team that built the archive. Her entries explained the human perspective. They had given the galaxy 300 years of direct help. They had taught by example. They had shared every technique and technology. But the galaxy had learned to depend rather than to grow. So humanity made the hardest choice. They left behind the knowledge but removed themselves. The galaxy would either learn to use the tools or fail. Either outcome would teach the lesson that needed learning. The final file in the archive was a message from Fleet Admiral Ryan Cooper. He appeared on screen looking tired but determined. He spoke directly to whoever found this place. "We did not leave because we hate you. We left because we love you enough to let you grow. You have everything you need. The knowledge is here. The tools are available. The question is not whether you can survive without us. The question is whether you will choose to become what we always believed you could be. We showed you cooperation. We demonstrated selflessness. We proved that different species can work together. Now you must decide if those lessons meant anything. The galaxy does not need humanity. It needs every species to be their best selves." That was always the point, the message ended. Kelrin looked at his crew. Pix was crying, which was unusual for Quillen, who rarely showed emotion. Senna's large eyes reflected sadness and understanding. Holly smiled despite tears on her cheeks. They had found humanity's final gift. Not rescue, not solutions handed to them, but the chance to save themselves. Kelrin made a decision. They would return to council space with the archive's knowledge. But they would not simply give it away. They would teach it the way humans had tried to teach, not as commands to follow but as principles to understand. not as fixes for current problems, but as foundations for lasting change. Humanity had given the galaxy the tools. Now someone had to teach the galaxy how to use them, and perhaps in learning, the galaxy would finally understand what humanity had been trying to build all along. They left the outpost and began the journey home. Behind them, the archive waited in the darkness beyond the threshold, a library of hope for a galaxy that had forgotten how to hope for itself. The question was whether anyone would be willing to learn. 1 year after humanity went silent, Kelron stood before what remained of the Galactic Council and presented the archive. He had copied all its contents onto data cores that he distributed to every representative present. The reaction was not what he hoped for. Chancellor Vrix immediately ordered engineers to begin using the transit network repair procedures. The Quillen Collective started calculating how much they could charge for archive medical treatments. The Thorian military wanted the weapons technology humans had carefully excluded from the archive. Everyone wanted to use human knowledge, but no one wanted to learn human wisdom. Kelron tried to explain that simply using the tools would not work. Humanity's success had not come from superior technology alone. It came from an approach to problems that put cooperation above competition and service above profit. The council members nodded politely, but their eyes glazed over. They wanted quick fixes, not philosophical discussions. They wanted humanity's solutions without becoming like humanity. Kelron realized he was watching the same pattern that had driven humans away in the first place. The situation outside the council chambers was worse than when Kelron had left. The Thorian-Axel War had reached a brutal stalemate with neither side able to win, but both too proud to negotiate. The silent death plague had mutated into 3 different strains. The original cure from the archive worked on only one strain. The transit network was barely functional, with more anchors failing every week. Starvation spread across worlds that had relied on food shipments now impossible without safe routes. Billions suffered while their leaders argued. Pix took the medical data from the archive and tried to organize a relief mission to plague worlds. He offered the treatments for free, which scandalized other Quillen merchants. They accused him of betraying their culture of profitable trade. When he persisted, they sabotaged his supply ships and spread rumors that his medicines were defective. Pix discovered that trying to act like humans had acted made him an outsider among his own people. The Quillen culture valued individual profit above collective welfare. Changing that meant changing everything about how Quillen thought about themselves. Senna studied the archive's medical protocols and understood why they worked so well. Human medicine did not just treat symptoms. It addressed root causes and prevented future outbreaks. But implementing these protocols required cooperation between species who had never worked together before. She organized a medical conference bringing together healers from a dozen species. The Mindari wanted to use telepathic healing. The Quillen insisted on charging for services. The Thorians believed pain built character and resisted certain treatments. Everyone had their own methods, and no one wanted to adopt someone else's approach even if it was more effective. Holly Chen emerged as the key to breaking through these barriers. She began traveling to different worlds, teaching not just what humans did, but why they did it. On a Thorian military academy, she explained to young officers like Lieutenant Kryn that true strength included knowing when not to fight. Conflicts resolved through understanding lasted longer than victories won through violence. Some older Thorians called this weakness, but younger ones listened. They had watched the war consume their empire and wondered if there was a better way. On Quillen trading stations, Holly taught merchants that long-term prosperity required healthy customers and stable trade routes. Charging desperate people inflated prices during crises generated short-term profit, but destroyed the trust needed for lasting business relationships. Humans had understood that helping others created partnerships that benefited everyone over time. A few Quillen, including Pix, began experimenting with this approach. They offered fair prices and assistance during emergencies. To their surprise, they gained more business than merchants who gouged customers. The Mindari proved most receptive to Holly's teachings. Their telepathic nature let them sense the sincerity behind human methods. Senna became Holly's closest ally in spreading the lessons from the archive. Together they established the first real success story. A combined medical team of Mindari, Quillen, and Thorian doctors went to a plague world using archive protocols. They not only treated patients but taught local healers how to continue the work. When they left, the plague was contained and the local population could manage future outbreaks themselves. It was a small victory, but it proved change was possible. Kelrin watched these efforts with cautious hope. He noticed a pattern. Younger beings were more willing to learn than older ones. Species that had suffered the most were more open to new approaches. Those who had worked closely with humans before understood the lessons more quickly. Change was happening, but it was painfully slow. Thousands died while the galaxy debated philosophy. Kelrin wanted to force faster change, but Holly reminded him that humanity had not forced anyone. They had demonstrated and taught and waited for others to choose. Forcing would only create resistance. General Vorn's Purity Front grew stronger by exploiting the galaxy's suffering. He blamed the chaos on species who tried to act like humans instead of embracing their true nature. His forces attacked medical teams using archive protocols. They destroyed schools where Holly taught human methods. Vorn declared that the galaxy's pain would only end when all human influence was purged completely. His message resonated with beings who were frightened and angry, and looking for simple answers to complex problems. The Council finally fractured completely when the Thorian Empire withdrew to focus on its war. Other species followed until only a handful remained. Chancellor Vrix resigned in disgrace. The institution that had governed the galaxy for 1,000 years effectively ceased to exist. In the absence of central authority, individual species made their own choices. Some embraced the archive teachings, others rejected them. Most tried to muddle through using whatever worked in the moment. Kelrin realized the old galaxy was dead. The question now was what would replace it. He called together everyone who had successfully implemented archive methods. Medical teams that stopped plague outbreaks, engineers who repaired transit anchors, mediators who resolved local conflicts, teachers who spread human principles. They met on a neutral station and shared their experiences. These beings came from 24 different species who had rarely cooperated before. But they had all learned that working together produced better results than working alone. From this meeting came a new plan. Instead of trying to rebuild the Galactic Council, they would create a network of independent groups dedicated to specific problems: medical coalitions, engineering cooperatives, diplomatic corps, educational institutes. Each group would welcome anyone willing to learn and work according to principles humanity had demonstrated. Service over profit, cooperation over competition, understanding over judgment. These groups would not rule anyone. They would simply offer help to those who wanted it and teach methods to those willing to learn. Holly suggested they call this network the Reach, in honor of humanity's reach across the galaxy. Others agreed. The Reach began small with just a few hundred members operating on 12 worlds. But word spread. Species heard about medical teams that actually stopped plagues, about engineers who repaired transit anchors without charging impossible fees, about mediators who ended conflicts instead of prolonging them. Slowly, more beings joined. More groups formed. More worlds asked for help. The galaxy was still broken. The war continued. The plagues killed. The transit network remained damaged. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since humanity left, the galaxy was trying to solve its own problems. Not perfectly, not quickly, but genuinely. Beings from different species worked side by side, learning to see each other as partners instead of competitors or obstacles. They made mistakes. They argued. They sometimes failed, but they kept trying. Kelrin stood on an observation deck watching ships arrive at the station. Medical vessels, supply haulers, diplomatic shuttles. Each ship carried beings committed to building something better. It reminded him of the old days when human ships filled the docks. But these were not human ships. They belonged to the species who had learned from humanity's example. The galaxy was finally growing up. Senna joined him at the window. She asked if he thought humanity would be proud of what they were building. Kelrin considered the question carefully. Humanity had wanted the galaxy to stand on its own feet, to take responsibility, to choose cooperation freely, rather than depend on human enforcement. The Reach was exactly that. It was imperfect and incomplete, but it was genuine. Wherever humanity had gone, Kelrin believed they would approve. The real test was still ahead. The galaxy had started learning, but the lessons were far from complete. The question remaining was whether this fragile new beginning could survive long enough to become something lasting, and whether somewhere beyond the threshold, humanity was watching and waiting to see what their students would become. 2 years after humanity went silent, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Thorian-Axle War had ended not through victory, but through exhaustion and mediation by Reach diplomats. The silent death plague was contained on all affected worlds with treatments developed by multi-species medical teams. The transit network functioned at 70% capacity maintained by engineering cooperatives that included members from 15 different species. Billions still suffered from the years of chaos, but the rate of collapse had stopped. More importantly, the character of galactic civilization had fundamentally shifted. Species that had never cooperated now worked together routinely. Leaders spoke of service rather than glory. The painful lessons were finally being learned. Then the signal arrived. A human automated beacon was detected at the edge of known space near the threshold. It was not a message, but rather navigational data, suggesting human ships were active in that region. The news spread through the Reach network within hours. Kelrun received reports from a dozen sources, all asking the same question. Should they try to contact humanity? The debate that followed revealed how much had changed. 2 years ago, everyone would have immediately demanded human help. Now the discussion was more nuanced. Some argued humanity should be left alone. They had earned their peace and the galaxy had no right to disturb it. Others wanted to apologize and explain what had been learned. A few hoped humanity might return to help with problems that remained unsolved. Holly Chen listened to all sides and then made a suggestion that surprised everyone. They should show humanity what their absence had taught the galaxy, not to ask for anything but simply to share what had been built from the ruins. The Reach organized a delegation. Kelrun would lead it along with Holly, Pix, and Senna. They were joined by representatives from 12 species, including Lieutenant Kryn, who now commanded a Thorian peacekeeping vessel. They brought no weapons and made no demands. Instead, they carried documentation of everything that had changed. Medical teams working across species lines, engineering cooperatives maintaining systems together. Diplomatic corps trained in methods humanity had pioneered but adapted by those who learned them. Evidence of genuine transformation. The journey to the threshold took a week. During that time, the delegation members shared their experiences. Kryn talked about how Thorian culture was slowly changing, as younger generations questioned the old emphasis on honor through combat. Pix described the new Quillan trading ethics that prioritized sustainable partnerships over quick profits. Senna explained how Mindari healers now worked alongside Thorian doctors and Quillan pharmacists, creating medical advances none could achieve alone. Every story illustrated the same theme: species learning to be better versions of themselves. They navigated through the threshold using the maps humanity had left in the archive. On the far side, they found something that took their breath away. A massive human fleet orbited a star system that sensors showed contained dozens of habitable worlds. These were not the cramped industrial colonies humans had built in the old galaxy. These were beautiful cities visible from orbit with green spaces and clean energy and thoughtful design. Humanity had spent 2 years building a new civilization from scratch, and they had done it without the burden of carrying anyone else. A human patrol ship intercepted the delegation. After confirming they were unarmed and came peacefully, the patrol escorted them to a large station orbiting the system's main world. Kelrun's heart raced as they docked. He was about to see humans again after 2 years of absence. The airlock opened and Captain Jake Morrison stood there looking older but healthy. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw the diverse group that emerged. A dozen species standing together, including a half-human woman, who resembled someone he once knew. Morrison led them to a conference room where Commander Lisa Hayes waited along with other human officials. The atmosphere was cautious. Hayes asked why they had come. Holly stepped forward and explained simply. They came to show humanity what their absence had taught. She presented data cores containing records from the past 2 years, the struggles and failures, the slow learning, the genuine changes in how species related to each other, the formation of the Reach and its growing success at solving problems through cooperation. The humans reviewed the data in silence. Kelrun watched their faces showing surprise, sadness, hope, and skepticism. Finally, Fleet Admiral Ryan Cooper entered the room. He was the leader who had made the decision to leave. He looked at each delegation member carefully before speaking. He asked them directly whether they came seeking humanity's return or humanity's approval. Holly answered with complete honesty. Neither. They came because humans deserved to know that their sacrifice had meaning. The galaxy had learned the lessons humanity tried to teach. It was slower and messier than anyone hoped, but it was real. Cooper nodded slowly. He explained that humanity had discovered an entire new galactic cluster beyond the threshold. Hundreds of star systems with no intelligent life. They had spent 2 years building a new home, free from the exhaustion of endless service. They had peace here. But he admitted they also felt the weight of what they had left behind. Humans were not built to ignore suffering even when that suffering was partially self-inflicted. The question they debated among themselves was what kind of galaxy they would return to, if they ever returned. Kelron spoke for the first time. He said humans had asked whether the galaxy could survive without them. The answer was barely, but yes. The harder question that humanity really asked was whether the galaxy would learn and grow. That answer was also yes. It was incomplete and imperfect but genuine. The Reach operated on principles humans had demonstrated: service without expectation of reward, cooperation without domination, solving problems together with no single species bearing the burden. It was what humanity had wanted all along. Morrison and Hayes looked at each other with an unspoken conversation. Cooper studied the delegation carefully. Then he made a decision that would change everything again. Humanity would return, but not as saviors or caretakers. They would return as partners and equals. The new Galactic Compact would be written establishing principles all species agreed to follow. Mutual aid, genuine cooperation, shared responsibility. Problems would be solved together. Humans would share knowledge of the new galactic cluster, and all species would explore it as equals, building something better than what came before. The delegation returned to the old galaxy with news that humanity was coming back. The reaction was complex. Some celebrated, others worried. A few, like General Vorn, promised to fight any human return, but the Reach network held firm. They had proven they could stand without humanity. Now they would prove they could stand beside humanity, as partners who had learned the value of what they once took for granted. 5 years after humanity's return, Kelron stood on Earth watching the sunset over a rebuilt city. The planet was alive again, but different from before. Humans shared their cities with dozens of other species. Mixed neighborhoods where Vexari children played with human children. Markets where Quillan merchants and Thorian artisans worked side by side. Medical centers staffed by beings from 20 different worlds. Earth had become a symbol of what the galaxy could be when everyone chose cooperation. The transit network was fully restored and expanded by teams that included humans, but were led by others. The new galactic cluster beyond the threshold was being explored by joint expeditions with each species, contributing their unique strengths. Former enemies traded freely, and some even intermarried, creating new generations who saw species differences as interesting rather than divisive. The galaxy had not become perfect, but it had become something humanity always believed was possible. A community of equals working together. Holly Chen commanded an exploration ship crewed by humans, Vexari, Quillan, and Thorians. She was following in her mother's footsteps as a scientist, but doing it in a galaxy that had finally grown up. Kelron served as the first Secretary General of the reformed Galactic Council, which now operated on consensus rather than dominance. Pix's trading company became the model for ethical commerce across 100 worlds. Senna directed a medical institute where the brightest healers from every species learned together. Lieutenant Kryn had become Admiral Kryn, commanding a multi-species peacekeeping fleet. She remembered watching Captain Jake Morrison work years ago, and thinking his methods were impossible for Thorians to learn. Now she taught those same methods to new recruits from her own species. Morrison and Hayes had retired to teach at the Diplomatic Institute. They trained the next generation of mediators who would carry forward the work of building peace. One day, a young Vexari student asked Holly why humanity came back. Holly smiled and repeated what her mother once told her. Humanity left because the galaxy needed to learn. Humanity returned because the galaxy did. The real story was never about humanity going quiet or the galaxy falling apart. It was about everyone learning that civilization requires everyone's effort. Humans had given the galaxy the greatest gift possible. Not solutions, but the chance to learn how to create solutions. Not rescue, but the opportunity to save themselves. And in doing so, every species discovered they were capable of more than they